Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. It's traditional to do an end of season update, so I'm going to make a start on that today. And it's a main watering day today. Most things in here, until I get fed up with doing it, will get watered. As a consequence, I'll be handling the plants, and I'm going to do this differently this time. I'm literally just going to film the plants as and when I come across them. So they are going to be jumbled up. The idea of doing all the same in a video does get a bit samey, if you see what I mean. So by jumbling them all up, you never know what you're going to get. So you'll have to watch it all and find out, won't you? Trickery. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to make a start. I'm giving my Spanish moss a soak at the moment. That's been a bit neglected. That hasn't been done for 4 or 5 days. The only reason I get away with that is the high humidity, otherwise they'd probably be crispy by now, but I get away with it. So I'll make a start, and as I said, you won't get one a day, you'll get one every now and again, but I'm going to film a hell of a lot of it today and just put the clips to one side, and then I can mix and match and jumble things up and hopefully make each one an interesting video. That's my theory. And today we have sunshine. First time for a long time we've had a sunny day. Now I don't know whether it's going to last all day, probably not. We've got a sequence of storms coming in one after the other, and it sounds like the one on its way now is going to be pretty bad, especially for my Irish friends. So batten down the hatches, yeah, get everything that can blow over out of the wind, make safe, and look after yourselves as well. Yeah, this one doesn't sound too clever. So anyway, I'll make a start. And just before I water, you get a snippet of information now and again in a comment, and you suddenly think, actually that's right, I'm being silly here, aren't I? And it goes down to the trays that my pots stand in. Now the trays are there to stop the plants dripping on the plants below. In addition to that, these wire racks can make small pots quite unstable, because they fall halfway in a hole, so it's not so good. But somebody said that if you've got an air cone pot, the idea is to have air circulating around the base of the pot. Well, if you stand it in a tray, you're defeating the object. Never really thought of it, but I have now. So as I go round, some of these trays are coming off, and I'll be picking on the plants that seem to stay wet near the bottom of the plant, if you see what I mean. In other words, I need to water them because half the pot's dry, the other half's still wet. And that's not ideal, because that bottom part can just get soggy. So by getting rid of the tray, hopefully we'll get more airflow round and a drying mechanism from the base of the pot as well as the top of the pot. So that's my theory, and there might be some language that I'll edit out, because I think some pots are going to fall over trying to stand them up on these wire racks, but I think it's worth a try. The whole idea of an air cone pot is to have air circulating around the whole pot, and some moisture escaping from the bottom of the pot, and some air getting in. So standing them in a tray almost, negates that. And it's quite an important little thing, so I think I'll have a go at that today while I'm at it. And just on another useful point, again, in a comment, you don't think of these things. I've had a problem with a dendrobium recently with mould in the pot, and if you've seen the video, you appreciate that I'm reasonably certain how that happened. Well, I've still got some pots standing on the floor. That's a little bit iffy, isn't it, if you consider what happened to the dendrobium and the treatment it had to have. So at the moment, I've still got a spare wire rack not being used, and there's an area over there where there's some pots standing on the floor. Well, if I put that rack there, they're off the floor. That makes more sense to me. It's only a couple, it's not a big deal, and quite honestly I could probably put them somewhere else, and now I've got some space. But yeah, if I've got possibility of mould getting in from the floor into the pots, then get the pots off the floor. Makes sense. And while I'm at it, I might have a sweep up as well. It's getting pretty grubby on the floor over in those corners, because it's difficult to get at. But perhaps I'll make an effort while the pots are out of the way being watered. Right, so these are the only 3 Masdevallias I've actually got left. I've been struggling with the 4th one for long enough, and a week or so ago it got dumped, basically. So these are the 3 I've got left. This is a named hybrid. This is Elizabeth Janza, and boy is that dry. It's in moss, and moss, it really shouldn't get dry like that. Not the best way to look after Masdevallias, but every now and again, if they dry off, it doesn't seem to hurt them. This has got good signs of new growths coming, new roots coming. It's got new growths on it. Didn't take too kindly to being repotted, but it's recovering nicely. New root growth and some good new leaves on that one, coming on nicely. This is an OID hybrid. This one I decided to pot in mainly bark. It's put on a lot of roots, and it's got some good top growth as well. So this one's coming on nicely, and neither of those 2 have bloomed for some time. Come on, you guys, get on with it. Now this is another named hybrid. This is what's my largest, and certainly was by far my best Masdevallia. It was a quality plant. This is Masdevallia Snowbird. This one really objected to being repotted. It didn't like it at all, and I still see no new root growth showing. But it has started producing new growths, a lot of new growth. So it's coming on and recovering. Now we're going to get fogged. Yeah, so that's my 3 Masdevallias. They're all okay. None of them are doing badly. They're all progressing. So they've put up with the heat in the summer, and this, quite honestly, is their favourite time of year. The temperatures are lower. Yeah, it just suits them far better. But none of these have bloomed this year, not one. Now, this little set is off one of the cooler growing shelves and the lower light levels, but not dramatically low light, just not as high light as things like Cattleyas and stuff. Both of these are the same. These are Coelogene cristata, and it's the variety Lemoniana. It has nothing to do with the colour, apparently. It's the guy who produced the variety, Mr. Lemon or something like that. Anyway, these 2 have grown incredibly well this year. I am well pleased. I've got good fat pseudo bulbs and 2 potfuls of roots. Non-bloomers so far. I'm hoping for big things in the late winter, early spring. These 2 are both the same. This is Coelogene fimbriata, dug off a mount, potted up in little pieces. They've grown on well and are currently blooming. Pretty little blooms, lovely little thing, and they are slightly fragrant. If you can get a pot full in bloom, they're actually quite fragrant, but that's unusual. I didn't realise you could get 2 blooms on a spike, so that's unusual. But yeah, a couple of flowers have been and gone, and still some to come, but both of those potfuls are doing pretty well. This is an oddity. This was a kiki, effectively. This is a Pleurathalis, and it's Restrepiodes dragonstone. And I'm not watering this. That's going to one side because that needs coming out of that pot. It's been in there quite a while, and for the size of the roots, the bark is far too big. So we'll get on with that. Now this one has never been filmed because I don't know what it is. Haven't got a clue. This was a gift from Arthur at Burnham's. I hope Sarah's not listening. For my daughter, when she went to have her surgery, he said, well, I'd like to give her a present for when she comes out. And there was no tag on it. And he told me what it was at the time and said, don't get it in bright light, keep it reasonably shady and keep it moist. But apart from that, I haven't got a clue what it is. Not a clue. So it's never been filmed before. It's not in my notes either, because I don't know what to call it. But yeah, it still sits there. It's grown some new leaves this year. It's not happy with some of the older ones, and it's pushed out some roots, but God knows what that is. This is Miltoniopsis Junette, and I haven't had this one long. It was actually bought in bloom as a pale yellow bloom. Since then it faded through a buff colour, and it's now virtually white. So it's a real colour changer, this one. Not the best of plants, but it's not bad for a bought Miltoniopsis. So I'm pleased with this. I'm waiting to repot it. until after the blooms have gone. And I might even give it a bit longer and see some signs of new growths, but it's due for a repot as soon as it's practically possible. But blooms are nice. These are my two largest Restrepias. Restrepias bloom on and off. They very rarely have a long period with no blooms, but they do have quiet spells, and the quiet spells for me tend to be in the heat of the summer, which they're just not so keen on. It's not really the heat that does them in, although they don't like hot. It's the fact that given that heat, the humidity drops a bit, and these need high humidity. But they're both growing on, they're doing well. This one's having a right little flush of blooms at the moment. Tiny though they are, they're very attractive. Probably about a dozen blooms or more on that one at the moment. That's Restrepia Falkenbergii. This one has got a long name. I'll have to get the tag. Where's the tag gone? Come on! Antenifera hemsleana. So again, both of these are species and one's a named variety. Growing well, doing great. Quite pleased with these and surprised they survive in my environment, but they do. So good stuff. Now this is the mother plant of what is effectively my only Pleurophthalus, it's Restrepiodes dragonstone, and this is on the why won't you bloom list. Come on, plenty big enough by now. It does produce sheaths in the leaf every now and again, but so far nothing has progressed to a bloom. But several of the latest growths, the larger, newest growths, do have sheaths on. So fingers crossed, maybe, coming soon. Pretty good flowers if it ever does, but so far not a light. And I've had this one a while too. It's grown well, just not bloomed. And this is one of my Sherry babies. Point of order, Sherry with an A, not Sherry with an E. That just annoys me, it bugs me. Sherry baby, okay? One large plant, split into two. This bit's pulled on quite well. It put a growth out in both directions, both of which have matured, and this one's got a spike on it. There's the other one. No, not yet. There's no reason why it can't, yeah? You know, this one fully matured before the spike showed. Maybe that one will as well, but anyway, at least one of them's got a spike. The other piece bloomed earlier in the year, so, you know, both of the divisions are coming on. They're not doing bad. Now, this is Encyclia cordigera, and it's the named variety Siang Yu. This was in a hell of a state when I repotted it. It could be bordering on classed as rootless, but nonetheless it has pushed on some good new growth this year. Not bad at all, with associated new roots. That was the important bit because it had very few. So it's coming on, and hopefully one of those new growths will actually bloom. The best new growth is sat in the middle of the plant. It decided to push up out the side, and so it's virtually an aerial bulb, but all the roots associated with it have pushed down through and are in the pot. And I do have some pretty good root growth in the pot now, so it's coming on nicely. It should pull on well. But a classic example of what I was explaining earlier, the top of the pot, which is where most of the roots are, is bone dry. Bottom of the pot's still wet. The air cone is not functioning because it's sat in the tray. So as I go round, pots that will stand on their own and don't need a tray, their tray's getting removed. Pots that need to stay moist, like the Masdevallias and things like that, they can stay on their tray. They don't matter so much. But this, you know, this should have a wet-dry cycle, and I'm not doing it properly. So that's the point of taking the trays off. And whoever pointed that out, thank you very much. I think my plants will improve as a consequence. Every little helps. There's another little group of Restrepias. These all have something in common because they've all come from the Eric Young Foundation on the island of Jersey, which is one of the Channel Islands close to the coast of France. And quite honestly, is a lot more French than English, but apparently it's to do with England. Funny politics. But anyway, these three are growing well. They're not all mature plants yet, but this one has grown incredibly well since I've got it. This is Haulisse. You can get that they've all got a French tone in their name, quite honestly. They're all in bloom at the moment. This one has large blooms, as Restrepias go, quite colourful and frequent. This one's, I think, been in bloom virtually since I got it. Recent acquisition this year. Bought at the same time as this one, and this one's got a long name. I'll have to get the tag out. This one is Havre des Pas, and it's crossed with Gutulata, which is a species I've also got, which will appear on film. Only one bloom on this one at the moment, but again, quite large, lovely patterns, growing well. Both of these only have one bloom per spike. Some of the other Restrepias keep blooming off the same spike, some don't. That's just a matter of what goes into their makeup. And the last little one at the back is my latest acquisition, and quite honestly is now my favourite Restrepia. Again, without the tripod you can't see that bloom as well as possible, but I have done a close-up on it, and that one is Come Out and Fight Handoise. So you can see they've all got French names effectively, so the island should be French, it shouldn't be English. So that's those three, all from the same origins. Now this one is special to me because I should have lost it. Quite honestly, this was, its source was the source of my Fusarium and lost me quite a lot of Cattleyas. But I did get some intergenerics from the same place, so there was no guarantee they were free of Fusarium. So this one got treated accordingly, even though really it didn't show the signs, but it never grew vigorously, and that quite honestly is one of the signs. But since it was potted up, treated, it's put out two nice new growths, so extended in both directions, and it now has another new growth, and it has pushed out a root system. So we'll class that as made it. That is Alicera, Evening Colours, The Glooming. Who thinks up these names? But it's a bit special to me because it should be gone, and the blooms are stunning. So I believe I can now look forward to seeing those blooms again. A rescue that's made it, I would say. It's another one of my Miltoniopsis. This is Her Alexander, and hasn't bloomed for a while. It's in, the fans are kicking in now. It's getting warm, but it's endearingly known as Donald Duck, and it's a long story, and if you want to find out you'll have to go back through the videos. But it's got a nickname. Now, this has got quite a few new growths coming on it, and I see no reason why those new growths shouldn't bloom, as they mature. So hopefully some blooms on that in the not too distant future. It's now coming into its best growing season. Spring and autumn. These do not do so well for me in the summer. They stall. All I've got to do is keep them alive during that warm period, get them into the autumn, and then they've got 5 or 6 months to grow well when it's cool, and they do pretty good during that point of the year. Oh, and this orchid, every collection should have these. This is Orchis Coffee Eye, and basically it doesn't last long, so you have to keep getting a new one in, but it does well, but it just doesn't last. But yeah, every collection should have one of those, and that's the variety Demerara plus milk. And yes, I am mucking about. See what I mean? Orchis Coffee Eye. It lasts 10 minutes if you're lucky. You need a constant supply of this particular plant, or it just keeps running out. Terrible. Now these three are my young Restrepias, basically. These are all like seedling sort of size. The two with the red tags were my daughter's, but she just can't keep the humidity up, so they weren't doing at all well, so I've inherited these two. Now this one's got a strange name. This is Ephipium. It's easy for you to say. And this is another Antennifera, but this one's Frontino Giant. And that, if it ever does, has huge flowers on. They really are large. But both of those two need a repot. They got put in the larger bark, and it doesn't suit the fine roots. They've also been in those pots quite a while, so those two are going to one side for a repot. This one was a present from Oliver's greenhouse. I hate to tell you, Oliver, but it's going to bloom. I'm really surprised on such a young plant, but that's a species, that's gutulata, and that's been in the pot too long, I believe. That could do with its media refreshing, and possibly a smaller pot for a while as well. That's quite a large pot. But anyway, it's growing. It's put on a couple of new leaves. Another new leaf come in here, and on the last new leaf it produced, it does have a bloom. So although that needs repotting, I'm not going to do it now because I want to see what the flowers are like. All three of those have never bloomed so far. They're a bit young, so I'm very surprised at that. But I'm going to let it go and see what happens. Now, this is Miltonidium Peter Comp. Now, strictly speaking, it's not an intergeneric because there's only 2 genera gone into this one. It needs to go to 3 or 4 to be classed as an intergeneric. So it's just a hybrid basically between 2 genera. For me, grows well, blooms well. I can't ask for more. Beautiful blooms, very, very fragrant. Today, with a bit of sunshine in the grow room, it's filling the grow room. Absolutely brilliant. This does have a problem at the moment, and the problem is me. This is quite a large plant. It's produced a massive root system, and it's in pure Orchiata bark, and it's drying faster than my water rotor. Yeah? So this one will not get the tray taken away. I don't want the pot drying out as fast as it is. Yes, it needs a wet to almost dry cycle, but it's going a bit too quick for me at the moment. But anyway, it grows well for me, blooms well for me, and produces a good root system on every new growth. So a very good plant. Now, this is Miltonia Sunset. Again, this has bloomed on every new growth since I've had it. It grows vigorously and it produces quite large bulbs, but I was just looking at the plant, bit of a sidetrack but worth it. You see this is what's called sooty mould. Now I know why it's there, because where the plant was for a while it was underneath another plant in bloom, and the happy sap was probably dripping onto the leaves, and that forms this sooty mould. But more importantly, I just had a panic because I saw that, and my immediate response in my mind was spider mites. Now I don't get those, humidity's too high for them in the main. I have had one little outbreak a few years ago, but I've just got the magnifying glass on it, and it is a form of sort of fungusy mould. So this one now needs a spray with the fungicide. It's not going to lose the plant or anything like that. At worst, it will leave a few marks on those leaves. But, you know, I will basically get a bit of the fungicide on a little cotton wool pad and gently wipe these leaves and then spray the whole plant. As it's systemic, that should deal with it. So, yeah, ever vigilant, always watching out. But if I'd seen one sign of life on that leaf, then the priority would have been to deal with it, because it could well have been spider mites. But in the main, spider mites live there, underneath the leaf, not on the top in the bright light. So that just needs dealing with. It's not an emergency, but it is a today thing. I'm not going to leave it. But I know why, and it's easily dealt with. The plant itself's got, I think it's got 1 or 2 new growths pushing out, but again it's filled its pot, so it depends. See, this new growth's come out right next to the edge. It depends what it does next. This was the last new growth that's currently in bloom, so it depends where it decides to push out the next new growths. If they're in this area, it can stay in the pot, you know, but this one's pushing its luck. That's going to have trouble maturing because it's right up against the edge of the pot. But we'll see where the rest come out to decide whether to move it or not. I don't want to, it's doing well. Good roots, good plant. I just need to deal with that minor little problem. Yeah, it's in several places, but it's manageable. It's not a panic. I don't do panic. But if it had been spider mites, it would have been a semi-panic. If those little blighters get a hold, you could have a problem. You know, they really can spread fast. They're quite mobile, you know. So anyway, it's not, so it can be dealt with. Thought I'd better show you, as I've got an opportunity that doesn't arise very often, even though this is not really part of the update. Basically, little cotton wool pad sprayed with systemic fungicide, and whatever that was on the leaves has just wiped off. It's gone. And now I will spray the whole plant with the systemic fungicide to make sure there's none left. None. Yeah, it'll just deal with it. So that's that problem over. Now I've got to go and wash my hands. This is another one of my twinkles, and the most mature growth has a spike coming out of each side. The next maturing growth has a spike coming out of each side. So this is going to have a nice succession. It has several other new growths that are heading towards maturity. So I think this is going to be in bloom a long time once it gets there. What I need to know is what the colour is going to be, because this is either the other cinnamon or the yellow one, and until it blooms I don't know. Once the twinkles bloom I'll tag them and then I'll know for the future, but I've had to wait for blooms basically. Good plant, growing on nicely, bit of a setback when it was repotted because it didn't have very good roots, but it's recovered, it's growing well. That's a good twinkle, I like that one. Okay, how do you know when it's time to take a break? Well, you start knocking pots over, your battery's virtually flat on your camera, and in addition to that my memory card is borderline full, so I now need to go and clear the camera off. So this can be an ending to part one. Which clips get included I won't know until I make the videos up. But I'm filming everything as I water into lots of individual clips, nice short ones in the main. I do waffle a bit as I'm doing now, and I'll put them together in what hopefully makes each part an interesting video, rather than a part being dedicated to a certain type of orchid. They'll be all jumbled up, bits of all sorts here and there. And if you've got a special plant that you want to see how it's doing, well, you'll have to watch each part until you get to that one, won't you? Anyway, see you in part 2.